Hi, my name is Randy Gardner. You might have heard from me from the last time I set a Guinness World Record for staying awake for 264 hours straight. Maybe you haven't heard of me. If that's the case, it's a good thing that you're watching this video. The scientific community learned a lot from my endeavor, and the analysis they made for my behavior during the Wake-a-thon, along with the days after, is still quoted in academia today. Coming up is my story. To give a little bit of background, I was no seasoned endurance expert when I took this challenge on. In fact, I was just a regular 16-year-old kid in December of 1963. My friend, Bruce McAllister, and we had an idea for a science project. After some deliberation, we decided we'd try to break the world's sleep deprivation record, which at the time was held by a Hawaiian DJ who managed 260 hours. And while we did mention this was to be a purely scientific affair, the first version of the experiment was a tad bit more abstract. If I'm being honest, as silly as it sounds, we first wanted to focus on the effect of sleeplessness on paranormal activity. We found out quickly though that it couldn't be done, so we settled on studying cognitive ability after sleep deprivation instead. After coming to this decision, we decided to flip a coin to determine who would become the very tired guinea pig. As history shows, I lost, and just like that, we were off to the races. As a primary rule, I wasn't allowed to have any sort of stimulants to keep me awake. That not only excluded drugs like dexedrine and benzedrine, two of the more popular stimulants back then, but also strictly limited caffeine. Sure, I'd be allowed to have a soda once in a while, but I was barred with having any more than that, along with taking any other sort of stimulating substance. So I headed to the headquarters of the experiment, which was Bruce's house, and refused to shut my eyes. It took only 2 days of not sleeping for very noticeable effects to kick in. When given relatively simple tongue twisters to repeat back, something like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, I'd stumble over my words. I also had trouble focusing my eyes, and I lost the ability to identify objects judging off of touch alone. So if I say touched a table while blindfolded, I wouldn't even realize that it was a table. As the next day came, things went a bit off the rails in a different way. See, it was just me and Bruce on this epic and sleepless journey, so the only way we'd be able to do a proper analysis would be if he stayed up with me. Well, after 3 days, he ended up passing out, eventually snapping into consciousness while pressed against the wall, scrawling his notes on there like they were scientific cave paintings. It was obvious that having Bruce be the sole monitor wasn't going to be an option for much longer, so we were driven to bring a third person onto the team. After a quick search, we ended up recruiting a friend named Joe Marciano. But shortly after he arrived, we were also accompanied by someone with a bit more experience in the world of science. Who was that, you ask? Well, his name was William Dement. He is a world-famous sleep researcher and currently a professor emeritus at Stanford University. At the time though, while he was still at Stanford, he was fairly new to the field of sleep research. And he was a seasoned veteran compared to the rest of the scientific community. As he tells it, he was likely one of the only scientists out there delving into the topic of sleep in that era. And many people, including my parents, were skeptical that a prolonged lack of sleep could be fatal in and of itself. In fact, previous sleep experiments had kept cats awake for 15 days, at which point they died of stress. But those cats had been kept awake with chemicals, so no one really knew at the time if the chemicals had anything to do with why they passed away. In defiance of this skepticism, we pushed on, and he began his analysis. To spice things up, he rented a car, a convertible, and we drove around in that. So we had a really good time when Dr. Dement came down. That really helped me because that was like something different and new to keep me going. Day 3 brought me more struggles though. Another researcher by the name of John J. Ross, a member of the U.S. Naval Medical Neuropsychiatric Research Unit, was in charge of checking in on me during that time. While that was happening, he noticed some key shifts in my behavior. Specifically, he found that I'd become really emotional and uncoordinated, and I even started having strong mood swings once I hit the 72-hour mark. However, even though I'd be overcome with bouts of anger, when the doc kept telling me to stay awake, I was never reported to have entered a psychotic state. When day 4 came, thank heavens I was able to catch a lucky break and get a bit of help from my friends. They stayed up with me, although they weren't awake the whole time, and did everything from talking to me to listening to music, and they even joined me for a few good rounds of pinball and basketball. During the day, it was easier to go without sleep, as the sun was up and I had activities like basketball to play. But the night was more challenging as pinball gets boring after the 100th game. Even so, I powered through and kept repeating the tests we created to see how my cognitive and sensory abilities were affected by my lack of sleep. We analyzed my smell, taste, hearing, and reaction times and found they were all considerably impaired. But funnily enough, my performance during some of the basketball games on the court had actually improved over the course of a week and a half. To make things even better, I beat old Will Dement in a pinball game on the 10th day of the experiment. Sure, you could chalk it up to be the amount maybe I was playing relative to my normal routine, but I'm still proud of me. On the 5th day, I started experiencing hallucinations, and things only got worse from there. In fact, Stanley Coren from the Psychiatric Times put it well. By day 11, I had been taking an expressionless appearance along with slurred speech without intonation. They had to encourage me to talk to get me to respond at all. My attention span was very short and my mental abilities were diminished. In a serial sevens test, where I started with the number 100 and proceeded downward by subtracting 7 each time, I got back to 65, which was only 5 subtractions, and then stopped. When asked why I had stopped, I claimed that I couldn't remember what I was supposed to be doing. I, the brave and delirious hero, carried on until the wee hours of January 8, 1964, around 2 a.m. Tired and beaten, I had broken the previous record by a healthy margin, clocking in at a mind-boggling 264.4 hours, or a little bit more than 11 days, without a single bit of shut-eye. If you think they just let me catch up on my Z's right then and there, though, you'd be mistaken. I had to attend a press conference on the final day, and everyone reported I spoke without slurring or stumbling my words. I told them that I wanted to prove that bad things didn't happen if you went without sleep. After that, I was ready for a good nap, but not so soon. This was a major experiment now, and they had to have me taken to a naval hospital to have my brainwaves analyzed. They put this strange device on my head to conduct an electrocephalogram and EEG. There, I enjoyed a heavenly 14 hours of sleep. By now, I'm sure you're thinking, okay, I'm really glad you finally got your rest, but were you even able to be a person after that? It was 11 days. I know that's what leads me to it, in my opinion, the most shocking part of the whole story. I was totally fine, and I went to high school as usual the next morning. As I discussed in an interview long afterwards, I remember when I woke up, I was groggy, but not any groggier than a normal person. When asked whether I needed extra sleep in the days afterward, I replied, not at all. I went right back to the regular mode. Everything was fine. Strange, isn't it? The EEG reading provided useful information for researchers who found my first sleep afterwards contained an abnormally high percentage of REM state sleep, which they then thought was dream state sleep. In the following nights, the percent of REM sleep dropped in percentage points and eventually returned to normal. What's even stranger is that when my EEG readings were sent to a supercomputer in Arizona, the computer concluded that my brain had been catnapping the entire time. It kind of makes total sense in an evolutionary perspective. They thought the human brain might have evolved so parts of it could catnap while other parts were awake. That's why I haven't suffered any long-term side effects from this experiment. As you consider how strange that indeed is, let's reflect on one more fact about all this that I mentioned at the beginning. This was for a high school science fair. Bruce Joe and I got first place, as you might have imagined. On top of that, we earned the additional honor of being the third biggest news story of that week, falling behind the assassination of John F. Kennedy and the Beatles paying a visit to the USA. And that was for good reason too. Remember, not to toot my own horn too much, but I broke the Guinness World Record for the longest time anyone had ever been recorded going without sleep. That turned out to be even more significant later because it marked the last time that the Guinness World Records officials would note sleep deprivation records. Sensibly, they cited the inherent lack of safety along with the ethical issues involved in having the proper authorities watch over such a risky activity. Pretty soon, I even started seeing other people claiming to shoot past my record without getting the official recognition. Just 2 weeks later, a Fresno State College student named Jim Thomas allegedly beat my record by staying up for around 266.5 hours. Unfortunately for him, as I mentioned, this record was never set in stone due to there being no official analysis. Another person named Maureen Weston even claimed to have towered over both of our records with a staggering 449-hour no-sleep odyssey, which she performed during a rocking chair marathon in the town of Peterborough, Cambridgeshire. This, however, hasn't been counted in official record books for the same reasons as Jim's case. Maybe that's the best though. Wrapping up my NPR interview in 2017, I left the listening audience with a simple piece of advice that I learned harder than anyone, and I think it fits here too. You have to have sleep. It's important as the big three: water, food, sleep. You gotta have them, all of them. Now that we've heard of my remarkable story, let's go over some of the science behind why exactly sleep is so important. For starters, it makes you feel less cranky and delirious, which is a result of it combating the buildup of a neural byproduct known as adenosine, which collects in our brains during our waking hours. Essentially, a lack of sleep slows down our neurons, and the feeling of this buildup is what we recognize as being tired. When we go to sleep, the brain has the chance to clear it from the system, and we experience rejuvenation as a result. Okay, that sounds really useful, you're probably thinking, but is it fatal to not have it? Well, there's no documented case of someone's death being directly caused by sleep deprivation. However, animal studies that were conducted at the University of Rochester found that rats suffer the shutdown of their immune system and eventually die after a few weeks of being deprived of sleep. In short, this has to do with the sleep's function of the operation of what's known as the glymphatic system, which is a network of extremely small tubes in the brains of both rats and humans. They serve to clean out waste chemicals like adenosine and others, and that process mainly occurs when you're sleeping. Without this process occurring, the brain is unable to function at its best, and while we haven't confirmed that the inhibition of this process would lead to human death as a result of sleep deprivation, the fact that we have similar neurological hardware as the rats means it's certainly not off the table. Also, while not fatal, there have been reports of people starting to see things that aren't really there after some time awake. While these are often referred to as hallucinations, there have been debate as far as whether these are genuine hallucinations or just pieces of dreams that blend into real life as a line between consciousness and unconsciousness begins to blur. So to keep it simple, it's not the greatest idea in the world to try staying up as long as possible. And it goes without saying that I strongly advise you do not try to replicate my story. That said, what's the longest you've gone without sleep? And how did you feel? Maybe you have an amazing story you want to share. I'd love to hear it. Email us using the address in the description down below to get it animated, or let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. Thank you for watching.